and welcome to the Financial Secrets Revealed podcast. Today I am joined by my friend, the sassy Susanne Bransgrove. Now, Susanne and I go back a very long way, so that means she's now called Suzu, not Susanna anymore. Now, she used to be in financial services many, many moons ago and left the dark side to become self-employed. So corporate land is in her rear vision mirror, which is where I first met her. And she once asked me why I was self-employed when corporate land seemed to offer so much more. So we'll have to delve into that conversation a little later today. Thank you for joining me, Suzu.
Thank you, Amanda Moo, as obviously is what I get to call you.
I'm totally casual today.
After so many years. And it's always funny being reminded as to what life used to look like, so many years ago. And certainly if you would have predicted where I stand today, I would have just told you, don't be so silly. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. So anyway, there you go.
Well, you'd gone from, I suppose, business development roles in some of the larger Australian corporates and then made a massive leap of faith, I suppose, after a series of redundancies and disappointments to set up your first business, Families in Transition, which is much more where your passion lies. And I suppose there's been quite a few incarnations of what you're doing since then. So can you please fill us in on where you're at now and how you got there?
Well, as you sort of so beautifully put, a few redundancies. I call it the global financial crisis. It really was one redundancy that prompted a completely different journey. You did leave out one business, of course, which truly started this journey, which was Amplify Governance. As you might recall, really, sometimes I would love to tell the story how I very meticulously have planned where I find myself today and what it is that I'm doing. And I could always see that in my future, but that's in fact not the case. So
yeah, I can definitely laugh at that.
So I just disappoint myself a little bit with that. But it is exactly, I'm standing in the spot that I should be standing in Amplify Governance and the redundancy. And I sometimes like to joke about that's where I got my soul back, is what started this journey, working with family businesses in the beginning, truly on the business governance side, and then through Families in Transition, working on the family governance side and hand-holding family members much more and really starting to help them understand the importance of aligning family, managing relationships, good communication, and then, of course, business rigor sits on the other side of that. But it's been really quite an amazing journey, and there's so much I have learned in that time, and I do still learn something new with every single family I work with, which I'm very grateful for.
Now, you are a third generation family business owner yourself, and your history actually starts in exotic Europe, all the way back in Germany. So can you fill us in on what life was like, I suppose, for you growing up, what influences there were, and how you ended up in Australia, on the land down under?
Well, Germany is so exotic too, isn't it, really? Especially North Germany, where I come from.
There's beer and sausages. Hey, that's exotic, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, it's very similar climate to London, so not very exotic at all. But as you mentioned, born in Germany, I'm a third generation. Our family business related in the shipping industry. Our family business is actually 376 years old. So my grandfather, quite the entrepreneurial thinker, did purchase this business of the last remaining family member of the original family that owned it. And when I say my grandfather bought it, he was quite the nifty entrepreneurial thinker. So I wondered just exactly how much money changed hands and back in those days. So,
it's a corporate raider. He was a pirate. He swooped.
Let's not delve into that too much. But it's so one thing I can say when I talk about, how did I end up here? And this is where I should be, is that family business tends to be in your blood. There are conversations that you get to listen to and just ways of dealing with employees or suppliers and business in general that is very different in a family business than what you would experience in corporate. And I can honestly say that because I have experienced both. So I can draw that comparison. My dad, of course, was the controlling figure in our household, and he now is the major. I actually know he's not the major shareholder any longer. We're in a management buyout, but that's a completely different story. But for most of my life that I can remember, my dad controlled the business, the family, the purse string. So certainly was a very strong influence from a business mind and thinking perspective and how to make financial decisions, where my mum was really the emotional influence and was the nurture of the family. And I sometimes like to joke that I got my business sense from my dad and my emotional capability from my mum, and I'm really happy about this. If it was the other way around, I would probably be a bit screwed, because I'd be somebody who didn't know anything about business and wouldn't even care about it, and wouldn't care about anybody else either. So I was quite fortunate with getting the best of both worlds, I'd like to think.
Yeah, and you tell the story of how I think your parents were basically war babies, and there was a massive sense of scarcity around and the feeling after, I suppose, both wars, really. So you told me about these women who were involved in rebuilding the cities after World War II, and I'm going to have a crack at this German word, and you're going to laugh at me. So they were referred to as the Trümmerfrauen.
That was pretty good. It was very, very close. You've got a bit of a hello. And
Okay, my 8% ancestry German just kicked in.
because, you sort of make it sound German exotic, right?
I'm still working on that. So can you explain what these Rubble women, which sounds much more exotic in German, actually did? It's an amazing story.
So just to put the hard German pronunciation, we call it Trümmerfrauen.
That's exactly what I said.
No, you made it sound much more sexy than that.
In Spanish.
Obviously, after the Second World War, or actually through the Second World War, a lot of men were either lost or completely, so they lost their lives, or they ended up as prisoners of war, or they did come back disabled or severely impacted. And so, and of course, this is destroyed as the male population was, so were the cities. So Germany was severely bombed, and so rubble really is exactly what the cities looked like. But to be able to rebuild and move on, you had to somehow start creating order in the chaos and start removing some of the rubbish and the rubble, and create a foundation to be able to rebuild from. And that's exactly what a lot of the women did. They started to get to work even before the men were released, to put some order and some structure back into what the city landscape, and allow for new buildings to take place, or for renovation, or anything that needed to happen for a rebuild to take place from. So they were very instrumental in very selflessly working tirelessly to create that foundation for rebuilding.
And I remember you also saying that back then, because of, like you said, the scarcity of men, full stop, let alone able-bodied, that the man was the plan financially. If you could find someone from a wealthy family, that was the way to secure your financial, personal, and family's future. So aside from, I guess, secretarial school, finding an able-bodied, capable man who could still work was a really big deal.
And secretarial school is exactly where my mum found herself.
Oh, there you go.
Of course, a little bit. So in my mum's generation, slightly different, because, of course, it was more an issue as to how many children there really were, and how many people survived. So German families were very small, and I think there weren't many wealthy people as such anyway, but some families fared better than others. And so, as you pointed out quite rightly, for whatever reason, but certainly in those days, your livelihood was secured through your husband's ability to feed the family and create financial means, and hopefully more than just getting by. And so what that unfortunately does is that women learn to just live with whatever they have to live with to keep that family or keep that man in their lives, and make sure that their children or their offspring are secured and that they don't have to suffer, which very different to how we get to make decisions, in particular on a financial level. We make decisions but based on our view of the world to a certain extent. It's not we're being selfish, but we have the opportunity to generate or have our own path forward, and we don't for 1 second think these days much anymore that we need a man to be able to get by. It's nice to have them in your life, but we don't probably need them as much as my mother did back in those days.
very different generational issues that we're facing, isn't it? So you grew up hearing lots of conversations about business and always loved the idea of money. So you took yourself off to study banking and finance in Bremen after high school. So even I think you said your work experience was in a bank. So finances has always been something that's important to you. So how did you go from there to moving out to Australia?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part, didn't I?
We'll get there. We'll get there.
You're quite right. It's actually funny because when mum sort of used to ask me at some point, why did you want to pursue this banking and finance career? And I think what I did say was because I like money, which is very strange. I think my relationship with money wasn't quite always as positive as it was in the early years. I certainly was a lot more just matter of fact about it back then. But met an Aussie playing hockey not here in Germany, there in Germany. And you mentioned that the weather was much better here. So fair enough, he was right on that. So that's how I ended up here once I finished my qualifications there. And the rest is history, as they say.
It is indeed. So the best financial advice you've been given, now I know you've got these double degrees in finance and accounting, but I'm guessing what you learned probably wasn't from a university study. So what is the best advice you've been given financially?
I'm sort of wondering, apart from the advice that my amazing financial planner gives me, that's definitely the best advice I could possibly ask for. Love you long time. It's interesting. I think, as the case with most of us, we need to find our own relationship with money and our own pathway. I do think, which is it, because if I look back, my dad certainly did his very best to instill a very strong sense of order and budgeting when it comes to life, when it comes to money and how to live with money. One thing that's quite funny is that even today he still lectures me on spreadsheets and budgeting, and I know that this is his way of showing me he cares.
It's his love language.
I have to admit, for a long period of time did I live by that, and until the day when I met somebody who didn't have the same relationship to money and didn't have the same ethos around that I did. And unfortunately, as much as I said before that I live my life very differently in regard to how my mum used to live, there was probably something that I must have learned from my mum that made me, that ended up with me forgetting who I was and making financial decisions that weren't quite, well, let's just say they weren't the best decisions that I made, and I forfeited security, safety, and actually a sense of self and understanding how I should be making decisions to make somebody else happy. And I don't have to really tell you how that ended up, but certainly those were the kind of lessons that you'll never forget, because if you live them, then they are part of your understanding how money really works, or how your decisions that you make impact you for the long run. So yeah, that's probably the best way I can look at it.
Yeah, so you've come from this quite structured background. You've lost yourself in this relationship. I think you once talked about it became chaos in your life, I suppose emotionally, financially, in many different ways, and you had to rebuild. So it's a beautiful segue into the next question of, have you had financial setbacks? So yeah, massive. And then how did you recover from that? So for people who sort of think, oh my God, this is the end of the road, I'm, at the end of my rope, how do you turn things around after that to make good again?
That's a really, really long question. I'm trying to work out how to structure it up. But so yes, in short, as you said, I did hit rock bottom when it comes to pretty much all parts of life. I'd like to sort of think I was mentally, emotionally, and financially pretty broken, and in the end, it's nobody's fault but my own. And to turn that around is a whole lot of hard work, because once you've suffered setbacks like that, that scarcity thinking rather than abundance thinking is something that's part of your life. And it's really been a long journey to turn that around and just keep stepping forward and just keep, look back and understand what part you've played in that. So it's no point blaming others for the situation you find yourself in, and that takes a little bit of time and healing. But then to look at the lessons that are within it and bit by bit just build the life back up the way you probably should have always lived it, and make the decisions the way you probably should have done them or made them in the first place, and to bit by bit gain confidence and just keep stepping forward. One thing I started to realize is that there's not a situation in life that you can't find a decision for, or say a solution for. There's always something you can do, and it might not be where you would like to be put in a perfect kind of scenario, but there's always a step forward, and there's always a way that you can find to create something positive out of the situation that you're in. And I think for those listening, the one thing I can say is it might be really, really hard to start with, and there might be a lot of fear involved in it, but if you just keep persevering and just keep stepping forward, then it just starts getting easier and easier. But the lessons that you have learned and the discomfort that you had to grow through to get yourself forward, those things will be the foundation for your life. Nobody can take that away from you. And so don't be ashamed of where you might have ended up, because in the end, in the long run, or in a few years' time, nobody will care about what happened to you back then or the decision that you made, but they'll see the progress that you've made.
Yeah, and I suppose there's one thing that I know both you and I are committed to, and it's this lifelong learning, like never stop learning. And, you've gone from this very structured, the budgets rule, cash is king kind of background. And also, I suppose there was also the very Western view of success meant a nice car, a nice house, good clothing, the outward trappings of what looks right. And you've come out of this, like you said, pretty broken and could only afford $100 a week for rent. So thank goodness for wonderful friends. And I suppose the ability that you had to go back to that original training of going, right, I need to implement this budget again. I need to understand where every dollar's coming and going. So that foundation, I think, probably put you in good stead to move forward financially. Of course, it takes a lot longer, I think, for the emotional scars to heal. But yeah, you had that grounding, I guess, to move on from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when you go back to what it feels right for you, there's a lot of pleasure in actually enforcing again the habits that you used to have in the first place. So every first of the month when I pay myself, I just get such pleasure out of putting money into the different accounts and having the discipline around having a budget for the month. And it's really interesting because I observed myself at the beginning of the month. I'm quite, I'm by nature, I like to be generous if I can be. So I tend to be a lot more generous in the first 25.
The account's a bit fuller.
And then by the time I get to the last 5 days, I go, I might have to sort of
tighten that belt.
I have to sort of, that's exactly right. But I try not to delve into my savings. I actually try to. So I do set myself almost a daily budget from what I've put aside, and I know that there's extra for things that I want to spend money on. And actually, it's a really quite strange satisfaction to get to the end of the month and have some money left over and put that aside, or to be able to do something and to sort of live within your means. I think there's nothing wrong with enforcing a little bit of scarcity as far as not having this instant gratification. Yep. And to be able to just sometimes say, well, do I actually really need this right now? And most often the answer is no. And it's really changed my spending patterns by, I don't get joy from shopping. I just get what it is that I actually need. It doesn't mean I don't buy a nice dress or a nice pair of shoes, but I do buy that if I feel that I really do need it. So it's changed my relationship to materialistic goods, to money significantly, but it's taken time.
And there's something you mentioned there that seems to be such a common theme, and I know many financial advisors swear by it, but live within your means. I think we do live in such a materialistic world where the entire role of marketing engines is, to part a fool and his money, pretty much, that you need this to look successful, to be a better dad, to be a better person, to be whatever it is they're touting that day. You have to spend the money on this magic product right now to to have success. You must buy this tampon so you can run on the beach.
But what if I don't want to run on the beach?
Handbag, you're sort of sitting there going, okay, enough already. And like you said, it becomes stuff, and you end up with either wardrobes or bookshelves or houses full of stuff that doesn't even bring pleasure anymore.
No, and that's why I look back, and as painful as it was, it's created a much better life with very different. I said, just the decision making is just different as to what really matters, and And I'm sure this is a common theme and thread that you hear from most people you talk to when they've had a difficult event. They turn around many years later and go, that was the defining moment, as painful as it was, and as much as I don't wish it on anybody, but to overcome and to have the resilience and to rectify it, almost say, areas where you've just taken the wrong path and just fix it, even if there was a cost involved in fixing that. I think that's something you can look back on, and nobody can take that from you. As I said, and it is, many people probably do define that as this one moment, right?
So you once told me that with the business lessons, definitely that the relationships come first, and it is just money, but you also gave practical tools about having, I think you said something about having a year's worth of fixed expenses or whatever you can afford to put away, whether that's 3 months or 6 months, in an account. So it was taking longer, I suppose, to build up that capital, but if it's also part of your dream, then never give up on that. And I thought that was a very practical point as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and I often do get the chance to talk to some who are inspired to start their own businesses, and certainly having the ability to turn around, as you said, and say, absolutely follow your dreams. If you have a vision, you should definitely follow it, but make sure that before you jump, you have at least a certain amount of cash in the bank, and just understand it always takes longer, as you said, to build something than you think, because other people don't operate on your time frame. So that's the problem. It's always the other people not doing what I want them to do. Amanda, what is it?
Another lovely lady I interviewed for the podcast, they moved down and from Darwin to the Gold Coast and set up shop, and they're like, why isn't the phone ringing? Doesn't everybody know we've arrived? So,
exactly right.
Yeah, the dream was there, just the activation of it and the practicality. So with all these lessons you've learned, I suppose, we've got these, and again, intergenerational lessons. What is your personal favorite form of investment?
My businesses?
Okay,
No, that's not
brilliant. Well, you've invested a lot in them, so.
Look, it's a really interesting one. As you might know, I do, having left corporate, I do struggle investing into a construct that I don't personally believe in. So ethical, sustainable investments are my preference, and where I like to invest, the ability to have positive impact as much as possible. I'm actually much more at peace investing into businesses that have a similar philosophy or view on life as I do. So I tend to find every time I invest in something that's corporate linked, it never works out for me. So I've decided to give up on that. So certainly that would have to be my favorite investment.
Yeah, there's certainly a trend, and I know you're a Gen X, but among the millennials or Gen Y, that is their preferred form of option now, either social impact or the ethical form of investing. So it's not going away anytime soon. I think it's going to become a tidal wave. I hope so.
It's interesting if you looked at it, and there are really good reasons. Sorry, I'm talking about this because I'm passionate about it. But there's a huge shift, what they call the lifestyle of health and sustainability, which we're seeing an increase in investment in those kind of products and services, about 10% per year, and that has been the trend for the last 20 years. And that is your Gen X and millennials who are driving that. But interestingly, also, women are increasingly financial decision makers. They tend to have well-paid jobs, even from a family business, intergenerational. When assets change hands, women are much more now beneficiaries of that, and women make different decisions. Mostly, they tend to make decisions based on purpose and why and passion, and in the same way that I talked about impact and sustainability. So I think we're going to continue seeing that trend. So that's not going to finish here. You're quite right. It's a tidal wave. Good reasons for it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, having worked in corporate and now gone out into the financial world of own business, which can be much less, I suppose, regular for income, can have feast or famine. Do you see any advantages in working with financial professionals, or you're a much more DIY girl?
Well, admittedly, I like to think of myself a little bit as DIY girl, but the reality is I don't have the time to invest into researching, or actually, quite sometimes I just don't have the time. Full stop. Not even for myself. Such, you know what it's like. The reality is, we are not the best people to make financial decisions for ourselves, and that's one thing I certainly have learned over the last years. Having somebody who can be your sanity and your the person who sometimes can sort of raise the finger and say, now you know you should or shouldn't, as much as I may or may not, as you know very well.
Yeah, I think there's a little more not in there.
But having said that, I do, I'm incredibly grateful for all your, when you're gently checking in and saying, hey, it's that time you should be
I didn't mean this to be a plug.
No, I know that, but it's the truth, right? And I have to come to value that these days a whole lot more than I probably did, especially when I was struggling, or when I probably didn't quite understand the value of the advice that was given. So hindsight is a beautiful thing, and I can honestly say there's a reason why you should have people alongside you who are objective and are able to just hold you accountable and hold the straight line when it comes to whether it's insurance, whether it's super, whether it's investments or divestment. Realistically, I'm probably the worst decision maker when it comes to that, because my bias is, will keep me where I already, where I'm comfortable. And so the financial advisor's role is just incredibly important from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think the accountability, like you said, is one of the main reasons people do use financial professionals, I guess, apart from the strategies and ideas. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. But I also just love the idea of outsourcing things that I don't have the time, the headspace, or, it also allows you to focus on what you're good at. And if your, best role is to be sitting in front of family businesses and helping them, and that not only gives you satisfaction but brings your income in, then yeah, why wouldn't you outsource anything from your ironing to your financial planning?
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I can guarantee you, if you left it up to me to get like income protection or TPD or whatever, it wouldn't happen.
And you're not the only one. You're definitely not the only one. Well, thank you so much, Suzu, for sharing your insights with us. Very interesting having slightly different background to many, and really appreciate that.
Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure sharing. So, and I have to say, some of the questions were a bit harder than I thought they would be. But anyways.
You thought you'd get off light with me? Really?
I should have known better. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.